Today is July 11th, 2024, and I'm here with Priscilla Welch-Delaere, a former Pekin Let's player who is here to share the history, legacy, and personal stories about her time with the Let's. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Starting off, I want to get to know a little bit more about your childhood. So where were you born and raised at?
I was born in Pekin, Illinois, along with my sister and my brother, which are real close in age. But I grew up here with my parents and identical twin sister. So we were, like I said, our sisterhood and brotherhood were really close. So we always played sports together.
And then what were some of your earliest memories of playing sports?
We lived across the street from a school that got torn down. So my parents encouraged us to play sports outside a lot. So we had a basketball court on our driveway, and then we always had an opportunity to go over to the park, which then after the school got closed, they tore it down. So we were able to play catch, just play the typical stuff that you would be outside. Our brother was older, so he had friends. So my sister and I would play sports with them as well. Growing up, it would be a Saturday, a weekend trip someplace for my brother, because he was older, so he did play travel ball, where my sister and I would play on a local Pekin Union Mission team.
And then, can you maybe describe those days of playing for the Pekin Union Mission team? What do you remember about it?
The Pekin Union Mission program is still going on as of today, and it is it's an initiation into the game of softball, and they have basketball as well. But they introduce concepts by doing coach pitch, so you typically have more than your 9 players out on the field. You might even have a coach at first base when you were younger, so that it made sure you threw to first base. There was no leadoffs. There was no fast pitch. You didn't have to worry about helmets because it was all kind of a controlled experience. But it definitely allowed us to get out to play against other people.
Oh, that's awesome. And then you also mentioned how when you were younger, you actually remember watching games at Diamond One on Wednesday nights,
yes,
which was the Pekin Let's. What do you remember from those days?
From growing up in general, 2 things is the Pekin Let's would always play on Wednesday nights, and then Pekin High School always hosted the state tournament for softball for the high school division. So between basically the time in late May, when the Pekin Let's would start in Wednesdays, and then you'd have the state tournament where they closed down the entire park just to do the state tournament games. And then throughout the summer on Wednesday nights, it was nothing to go over to the Diamond free of charge and watch, like I said, the Lorraine Ramsey, the just good play.
Awesome. And then can you maybe describe the community support that you saw at these games?
So they would, Fred Reeder was the general manager. He would have his sister go up and down the stands doing 50-50 so that we'd raise money so that we could do our travel teams. You'd have young girls be back girls, just like traditionally now as well. You had your regulars where they would sit behind the backstop because we don't have a bleacher set behind the backstop, but they would come and reserve their spot with their lawn chairs. The biggest thing is like my grandfather was a big supporter of the Pekin Let's. He worked for Caterpillar, and so he took pride in being there every day. Along with, like I said, we'd have alumni events. People would come out, do the first pitch, and then we'd honor those past legacy people.
Did you have any players on the Let's that you kind of looked up to or idolized as a child?
When I was playing at the age of 15, I was kind of just awestruck at the time. What I mean by that is I played, but I was so much younger than the kids that were there, or the adults that were there. It's hard, to be honest with you, it's hard to remember them all because we at the Pekin Let's took pride in what's called legacy players, where they would stay with the team, but as an adult league, people have other obligations. So it was often sometimes my teammates from the high school ball. There'd be certain people like a Sue Jackson who just left, or her name's Sue Brown, but now married to Sue Jackson. She would just come and show up just because she wanted to play that night, because it was always Wednesdays.
Yeah. And then, what was your high school experience like playing softball?
Well, Fred Reeder was also my high school coach. So I started off as a freshman. I played varsity in all 3 sports I played. So those same people that I've just mentioned were 4 or 5 years older than me. So when I became like a sophomore and junior, they'd still play on the Pekin Let's, even though they wouldn't be playing in college ball. So college ball, you weren't required to play on like a summer team. So a lot of kids did not. But high school wise, we were just an average team that we played for the love of the game. And I have friends that still hang out with me in terms of high school ball, all because they love to play softball, but they've turned into the slow pitch softball group now instead of the fast pitch group.
And then after high school, you got a chance to go play at Illinois State under Melinda Fisher, which I'm sure was an awesome experience for you.
Yes,
That
was a game changer.
Mm-hmm.
Melinda changed the whole way the game was thought of. Meaning, as you come in as a freshman, again, I started over kids that were seniors. I was freshman of the year at the Missouri Valley Conference, so that was to come in and know that you earned your spot, because that's the type of players she wanted to recruit, were people that can be self-coached. But she changed the game from the idea of that it's just a game to what's called a visualization game. That the mental part of the game is more important than the physical, because everybody that goes to college has the physical attributes, but it's the mental part that you bring to it. Can you do the studying during the day? Can you get up the early morning workouts? Can you still have your life outside of the game of softball, but with the travel and the time commitment that away from you and your family, even though they might be there at the game, you might not really get to spend the most time with your games.
And then, kind of tracing back, can you share how you first got started with the Pekin Let's?
I started with the Pekin Let's when I played Pekin Unimission, which was not a travel, like I said, in-house. The Fred Reeders had started a team called the Silver Bullets. It was basically a younger version, because he kind of knew that he was going to buy the Pekin Let's the following year, and that the name would change it over. So that was my first experience with the Silver Bullets. But then those kids that were those people that were on the Silver Bullets became the Pekin Let's when he took over the ownership of it.
And then I know you mentioned you started playing when you were 15,
Yeah.
really young age. Can you kind of describe your emotions going into that?
Well, I just keep in mind I'm 15, so I could not drive. So all these tournaments, which was more tournaments than what we currently have, but which would be like in Woodstock, Illinois, or Carlinville, Illinois, my parents had to drive us. But yet it was a women's team. So I was expected to be the 15-year-old to get there, but then once I was there, I would room, just like in college and other high school sports, you'd room with adults. So it was a little wide opening experiences for me in the game of softball, because the culture of the game of softball is different sometimes once people have defined themselves as a softball player.
And then I know you played a couple of big games that you mentioned with the Let's, such as the Olympic team.
Yeah.
And what did this mean to you in that moment?
Coming from good old Pekin, Illinois, before I was in the Olympic trial participated in the Olympic trials, that was the opportunity, because the Olympics never came to Pekin until he took over the Let's, and then we sponsored what's called the ASA National Tournament, so which was the main association of softball at the time. So, and the Olympic team was ASA affiliated. So, therefore, if you're going to have the national tournament, you've got to have the Olympic team. So, to be able to play against like a Michelle Smith, one of the greatest pitchers of all time, or Lisa Fernandez, Dot Richardson, I mean, that brought in a ton of people. So we brought them in one time to Pekin, and then we've brought them in several times down to Bloomington, just because they've got a bigger facility type of thing. But and so the other teams have played them, but it allowed me to play against them, I think 6 or 7 times just as an amateur before I got to go and play with them or try out for their team when I graduated.
Can you maybe talk about that tryout experience you got to have?
Yeah, so the Olympic trials, you had to be nominated to be able to participate from your college coach or a high school coach or whoever it is. They look through your resume. 2 people from my Illinois State team, a senior, Selena Fink, and I both qualified for the first round. We had to drive up to Northern Illinois University. That's where the team tryouts, because it's up by Chicago. So the first round was typical, what they would refer to as showcase type stuff now, where you ran, you bunted, you just hit off of a machine, you threw. Didn't matter what position you were, you just did all the little things that you had based upon your times, in your percentages, basically, batting averages off of their machines. Then you would advance to the next round, and it'd be back up in Chicago. So there were 3 rounds. I was 19 at the time. You could not be a professional player, so that kind of limited to college players / right out of college players, because we didn't have a professional team at the time. But regardless to say, I made it through the second round and then was told I was too young.
Kind of going back to your time at the Letts, were there any particular games or tournaments that were especially memorable to you?
Well, back in the day, I played first, I played third a lot, and when I was growing up, and pitched. So there were often days, even though it was a women's, that I would pitch 3 or 4 or 5 games in a day. There were games, of course, that I played third that I felt like I had 5 errors in a game. But I think the most memorable ones is playing against the Olympic teams, because around this area we only have 3 or 4 women's teams. So to play against the the Bloomington Hearts was probably what we played a lot, just to give the publicity out for the women's teams.
I know you mentioned you also got a chance to play the Breakettes.
Yes, so the Breakettes would come into town because of the national tournament. So between the Pekin-Letts and the Breakettes, they've been changed names several times, but they're the 2 longest teams in there. They're from Connecticut. Your women's team, the women's participants that were on the Olympic team, played for the Breakettes. So Lisa Fernandez, she played for the Breakettes. Jermaine Fairchild, which is a pro player of mine that is local now, she played for the Breakettes. So those players that became some of my players when I went pro were all from the Breakettes. But they would come in a couple days ahead of time. And we wouldn't play them in Pekin, but we'd play them over at Eastside, and we can honestly say that the Pekin-Letts were the first team to beat them in one of their games, because they hadn't lost in years, 5, 6, 7 years. So
I'm sure that was an awesome accomplishment.
Yes.
For you.
And we had a big pitcher from Iowa. She was good.
And then, what do you hope that future generations will remember about the Pekin-Letts?
Well, right now, the way the Pekin-Letts are kind of structured is we have a Pekin Power program that starts off little. And some of those girls that have been playing Peak and Power are now the Peak and Let's. The one thing I would love it to do is after college have the Peak and Let's have some of those players that are still there. Whether they're the coach player, kind of like I am with my current team, or just to be around the game. Is that they continue with the fact that it's not just a one weekend series, that that the possibility is that to showcase, just like a slow pitch, it can be on a Tuesday night, that you could go out and play a fast pitch softball game on a Wednesday night and get that community feel back for local sports. Because now that we do have professional softball, to go over and watch a Peoria Chiefs game, people do that. Well, so I'm not saying that we have to be professional, but it's the idea that it still gives aspirations for kids that, oh, you mean I can play long after I go down, like the Peoria Sunday Morning League for baseball. That's huge. I mean, you got players that are playing just because they love the game, and so I would hope that would continue with that.
And then, kind of getting into your professional career a little bit, what was the transition like for you playing from the Peak and Let's to professional teams?
Yeah, so when it was my senior year, I just drafted 37th in the league by what's called the Virginia Roadsters. So we played, of course, for the Peak and Let's, we played 4 tournaments. When you went professionally, the first year that we played 7 days a week, 7 days. And traveled from Atlanta to Tampa Bay to North Carolina on a bus. We had an apartment, but we were never in the apartment unless it was for the home games. And the expectations were a lot higher. Normally for Peak and Let's, you show up an hour early and start warming up. No, we'd be there 2-3 hours ahead, and you'd be signing autographs for an hour, 2 hours afterwards. You go to radio broadcasts, you do charity events. You lived and breathed softball and what that professional league was there for you. So, and like I said, then you had to form all new bonds with people. There was only two girls that I had ever played on a same team with before. One girl did play for the Peak and Let's. Her name was Holly Killian. She went to Western. And then Heather Compton. Then that was only because I was picked up by another team.
And then we kind of talked about this a little bit before, but what are your thoughts on the impact of like travel ball and college ball on the decline of women's majors teams?
That's a two-folded question. So the first one is the decline is because I think there's way too many games in a year. You sometimes lose the enjoyment of coming to a tournament or getting to stay overnight in a hotel when you're doing it every single weekend. I would love it to be, like I said, going out to the Park District and just seeing some people play for the love of the game in terms of a practice or a non-scheduled event type of feel. I think the National Letter of Intent has killed it for college players to say, can I play for the love of the team? Because there's always a catch. So at the end of the day, players now, it's what is it in it for me versus what is in it for the team. And I never grew up ever thought that we would be paid to play at a college level because I was getting my education paid for. I was granted that. Now, if you want to make it your job in life to go to, lessons or provide lessons to others, and to play professionally, that's one thing, but it's starting younger and younger.
And then you've been around the game for a while, so what are the most significant changes you've seen in women's softball over the years?
The face mask, that's one. I would never, if anybody ever told me I have to wear a face mask, I would have been done. I see the discrepancies between baseball to softball, face mask, no face mask. I mean, there's going to be injuries, but even though I've hit balls between people's legs, I've never heard them say, well, I need a face mask to do that. It's just that it happens. So I think that has changed a lot. Pitching has changed a whole lot because we used to have 2 feet on the mound. Now you can, pretty much jump wherever you want to go from the mound. The more of the men's league, and that was a difference as well. When I was growing up, we not only would play women's, that Pekin Letts didn't have a men's team, but there were organizations that we would go play, Decatur Twister for one. The men would play right before the women, or the women would play right before the men. So we would be able to watch those. You don't see any local men's teams around anymore, even though I think some of these baseball players could easily play fast pitch softball and make it, again, getting fast pitch out there a little bit more publicly based upon that. And then, like I said, the other major change is being paid to play.
And then what do you think needs to be done to promote softball more effectively?
I think ultimately it needs to be more of a community service type feel again. And you also have to get the younger generation. So I've encouraged a lot of our local organizations around when they're like, well, we lost our coach again, is to say, hey, go to high school players. They're, ask them to be a part of your team. Make them feel like you're a part of the family and respect that they know something. And if they make mistakes, they make mistakes. But that's how the younger generation is going to only change the future generation.
And then ending on, what advice would you give to those younger generations who are just getting started in softball?
Is find a mentor, find an adult that can be a part of that group in terms of that organization, and is only there to ask questions, to help you, guide you with parental concerns, equipment needs, how to fundraise, how to make it not about one player but about the team, how to get equal playing time. Just like if you were to do an internship or a student teaching role right now, is that they just need someone that can guide them, not necessarily has to be there every single time, but can give them the advice of, and be the buffer. Because with parents nowadays, they're about their child, and so you have to kind of change that feel that I'm here for the team. Like, I'm not getting paid. I'm just here because I want to showcase that I love the game and I want to spread it to the people that are around you.
And is there anything else that you'd like to share with us?
If I had to look at it in 10 more years, like I said, I really encourage that if you have a 10-year-old now, will they be playing when they're 20? And if they're not, if you say to yourself, my kid's going to be playing college sports, college sports is not a given. It's a granted. It's hard work. It's not parent work. It's hard work from the kid. The kid has to want to know. There are opportunities for all kids to play college ball, but you have to go with in the mindset that you have to earn it rather than be given it.
That's awesome. Thank you.
No problem.